Hi, everybody. I can see you all entering I can see you all coming into the meeting, the webinar. I want to say a very quick hello. I'm Cate Faehrmann, Greens member of the Upper House. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar on wetlands. We are tuning in from Aboriginal land, of course. I'm in Gadigal land. You're all wherever you are around the country. I need to go to the down to the chamber. There is a division bell ringing, which we weren't expecting. I'm going to leave you in the wonderfully capable hands of my policy advisor, Debbie, who is going to continue kicking things off. You'll hear from Debbie, Bill. I'll be back hopefully by then, but I can't miss this division. So this is how we roll, but I'll be back soon. Over to you, Debbie. See you soon.
Thank you very much, Kate, and great to see we've still got a lot of people joining in the meeting room. So I'll just wait a few minutes while people are being led into the meeting. In the meantime, though, it's great to see so many faces, some familiar online, and if at all possible, or if you feel like it, it would be wonderful if people wanted to add to the chat the land that you're meeting on, or any information you'd like to share about yourself and why you're participating today. So yeah, really would be really great to see where people are tuning in from and what sort of brings you here tonight. And we do still have a lot of people joining and being let in, so we'll just do that for a minute or two before introducing you to the wonderful Deb Bower and Bill Johnson. And apologies also if you hear the bells of Parliament ringing in the background. In fact, I might just very quickly close the door so they're not quite so loud if you are picking them up. For anyone as well joining online, it would be great if we could just get participants to mute during this part of the webinar in particular. Throughout the webinar, we have a question and answer function. So any particular questions you'd like to ask of our panelists tonight, please pop them into that question and answer function in particular. The chat function is more for introduction, if you want to introduce yourself, where you're kind of dialing in from tonight, that kind of thing. And while my colleagues are letting people into the waiting room, we might just kick off very quickly. Here we go. I can see they're entering now. So tonight, the reason we've organised this webinar is I think you're all very aware that the crisis in wetlands across New South Wales has been sort of increasing quite rapidly in New South Wales recently. There's been a lot of media. The people in the room tonight all connected about a month ago now on the ground in the Gwydir wetlands, where we met with Deb Bower and her research team that were rescuing turtles from the mud. And I think probably most people online tonight have seen those devastating images of those turtles being rescued. I had the benefit of joining Kate in the field and meeting Deb and touring around with Bill and meeting some of the wonderful landowners trying desperately to save and protect the wetlands on their properties. But it's a very crazy situation out there right now. For those that joined late, just to give you a quick update, I am Cate Faehrmann's policy advisor, and I'm just stepping in very briefly for Kate as she's being called to Parliament, which is going into an extended sitting period and is currently in a division that she's got to be in. She hopes to be back very soon. But now it looks like everyone has been admitted. I might just throw over to the wonderful Deb Bower from UNE to talk about that situation you saw in the Gwydir and what brought us all together and brings us here tonight.
Debbie, I'm just going to share my screen with you. Can you tell me if you can see um, a photo of a map of the Murray-Darling Basin? Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, cool. So today I'm going to be talking about the Gwydir catchment, which is here centered around the town of Moree, up in the Northern Basin. And to take you to the headwaters of this stream where I live in the New England tablelands. This is the Upper Gwydir, and it travels along the New England tablelands until you get to the Copeton Dam, which is where the river's been blocked off, and it now holds water that is controlled by Water New South Wales and then released downstream. As that water goes downstream, just to give you some landscape context, it then flows through some agricultural land, and you can see this cropping country just to the east of Moree, and then down here to the Gwydir wetlands. And this is a study site where I've been working since 2019, trapping turtles and looking at their population. So when we go to the site, normally it looks something like this. There is water up to our waist, and we put in these traps that you can see here. We can catch turtles this way, and we've marked over 300 turtles in this wetland since 2019. There's three species that live in this wetland. This is the eastern long-necked turtle. It is adapted to wetting and drying of wetlands, so it can survive out on floodplains that aren't always wet. But we also see this broad-shelled turtle, which is Australia's largest long-necked turtle. They're a big carnivorous species. And the Murray River turtle, which is another turtle species that occurs throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. And these two species on the left are more associated with permanent water sources. So they don't generally survive a long time out of water. They're not adapted to wetting and drying cycles. They like that security of having that water that they need. When we turned up in February this year expecting something like this photo, what we found was this. So this is my mate Shane, who's standing, well, roughly there is what you can see on the photo on the right, and he's pointing to a turtle track. So the turtles have been walking around looking for water. At this point, there was a little bit of water left in the wetland, but it was clear that it was going to dry out very soon and become a problem for those more permanent turtle species that we saw. So when I came back to town, I started looking into what was going on with these water levels in the wetland. And this is a graph here that shows time. And you can see back to the 1980s, the percentage of water that was in the Gingham waterhole. So this is taken from a DQ report, and you can see that for the most part, the wetland is a permanent refuge in the landscape. It has water in it. There was a time in 2007 when it did dry out for a little bit. And the blue in this section shows when we've been in managing environmental water. And since we ourselves have been trying to keep this wetland wet, it's dried out twice in 2020 and 2024, and now it's dried out a third time. So we've now seen what historically has been a fairly permanent refuge in the landscape change into something that's now drying out three times in the last 6 years. And that's problematic for the aquatic animals that live in this waterhole, particularly ones that require permanent water. So this is a photo of a turtle that's died in the mud at the Gingham waterhole. This was taken in 2019 during the first of those three droughts. There was water that could have been delivered but wasn't. And so we know that the turtles don't do well when the water's not delivered. And particularly the Murray River turtle that we had historically seen the largest populations of, there's now only a couple of individuals of turtles left in the waterhole. So to prevent this happening again, we did a rescue mission. We went out into the mud and caught the turtles, and they were then 40 turtles were taken to Taronga Zoo to stay there until the water is released. Kate came out on this day when we were collecting the turtles and managed to come back and alert the media and put some pressure on the government to have the legislation changed. It's not just turtles that it's problematic for when the wetland doesn't dry. So these flooding and these flows that the rivers have been really important for thousands of years, and the plants have evolved to be wet and then dry and wet and then dry. And so a lot of our floodplain vegetation, river red gums, coolabah trees, lignum, all need that water coming in those pulses that they have historically. And then there's those refuge in the landscapes as well that need that permanent water sources. When we don't have that water coming through the system as it has historically, we start to see problems like erosion. So when the plants die, there's nothing holding the soil and the soil is washed away, and that causes problems with turbidity, which is when we get these suspended sediments in the water and you get systems that start out very clear that then go to being quite murky. So that in itself is not good. Cows don't like drinking dirty water. Murky water is not good for irrigation either, but it's also problematic for the plants that live in these systems. So plants need light, and when the water becomes too muddy, the plants can't grow anymore. And that's cyclic because those plants are really important for cleaning the water as well. The other really big issue when we start to lose our floodplain vegetation is that they have these deep roots that help to keep the water table low. And so when the water table rises, because deep-rooted vegetation is removed, and this is something that's been a huge problem in South Australia with their clearing along the river, then salt is released into the upper layer of soil, and the land and water becomes salty. And of course, once you have salty water and dirty water, you start to lose sensitive species like mussels and sponges. But it also becomes very difficult to grow crops and agriculture, which we need for food. So this water that's released on the floodplain from Copeston Dam is important for maintaining all of these different animals and plants in the food web. And the other things that we appreciate in the water, like the fish that people like to catch and the birds, which we love, and the turtles, all rely on more sensitive things at the bottom of the food web. So the water sits in Copeston Dam and it's released. It's been set aside for that purpose to keep the floodplain alive so that we can keep the water healthy and usable for us and the environment. And so really, if we want to avoid situations like this, where we have poor water quality and we have issues with salinity and issues with erosion and turbidity, then we need to release the water to keep the floodplain vegetation healthy and to keep the rest of the system that relies on it healthy as well. With that, I'll pass back to you, Deb.
Thank you. It's maybe Debbie did me out of a job in the time I was down in doing my division. But thank you, Debbie, for Debbie Madaris, my policy advisor, for jumping in then when I couldn't, and thank you so much, Debbie Bower, for that presentation, and also just for being such a wonderful champion of nature and wildlife. I'm sure it was kind of talked about at the beginning, but being able to go to the waterhole, the three of us were actually there. That's kind of, I've been connected with Bill Johnson on a range of water issues and wetland issues over the years, but the three of us met each other literally on the at Gingham waterhole. I went not expecting it to be in just the most horrendous state that it was in. I heard that there were turtles being rescued from the mud. I thought what that meant would be turtles just walking on the mud a bit, and it dried out a little bit, and just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And the fact that these turtles were we don't know, obviously, what would have happened to them. We'll explore this a little bit more with Deb in this webinar. But the fact that Deb and her team could rescue 40 of them, if Deb wasn't there, that wouldn't have happened. And honestly, it was great. So thank you so much, Deb. It was, a real honour to do that with you, and to be the journalist for the time I was there, and record the shocking scenes that we were seeing. And that brings me to Bill Johnson, and then we've got time for questions and discussion afterwards. So Bill lives near Dubbo in New South Wales. He's an experienced environmental water manager, policymaker, managed environmental water in the Gwydir and Macquarie rivers, which he will talk about in terms of his history. He's an expert on environmental watering strategy, as well as removing constraints to environmental watering, which is super important when it comes to the water reaching those wetlands. So it's not just about the stupid liability risks in terms of the law, which we can talk about, but also, lots of these constraints along the way. He's a director of Slattery and Johnson, a water advisory company, and he's also a member of the Macquarie Environmental Water Advisory Group. And I, in fact, have also travelled with Bill to the Macquarie Marshes, which is another absolutely stunning, beautiful place, dependent on environmental watering, and that the management is right of that. And so that was pretty special as well. In fact, that was beautiful, and it wasn't dried out when we went there. So Bill, over to you to just explain your background and knowledge of wetlands and environmental watering.
Thanks, Kate. I'll start. I'm coming to you from Wiradjuri country near Dubbo, but what I will do, I'll follow on from, if I can share my screen, I've got a short couple of slides, follow on from Deb's point where she finished, where she mentioned the importance of water quality. Now, this photograph here is a photograph of the Namoi River at Walgett, and that's blue-green algae. Water New South Wales put out an amber alert on the 21st. This photo was taken by the Walgett River Rangers, who are part of Darrawa Elders Group up there, an Aboriginal community controlled organisation, and they're out on country and on the river doing a lot of good and important work. And they sent me this photo on Sunday. And there's the next one. There are a couple more where you can see on the bank, there are 3 black figures. That's the rangers using their drone. This is just downstream of where the Namoi joins the Barwon. And that's an algal bloom on Sunday. And there's one more, which is just where you can see the Namoi coming into the Barwon from the left. So that I put those up because it's immediate. It's a direct link to what Deb said about the importance of water quality in the rivers. This is, for those of you who aren't familiar with this part of the world, this is a couple of 100 kilometres down, about 100 kilometres downstream of the Gwydir wetlands, which flows into the Gwydir flows into the Barwon. So what's happening in the Gwydir wetlands is directly upstream of this. And what this does then is it's a link to the broader issues of environmental water management across New South Wales and across the basin. And I'll just quickly, I can see from the people here that a lot of you are already familiar with environmental watering, but there's a long history. The first environmental release that I'm aware of happened in the Macquarie Marshes in 1980, and that was organised by a scientist called Sue Briggs, who some of you may have known or heard of. But anyway, a young woman at the time, a real fighter for the wetlands, and she organised the first environmental water release in the Macquarie and possibly the basin. And I think without that, and this to me is a sort of an inspirational person, because without Sue fighting pretty much on her own back in the 70s, we wouldn't have any environmental water today, I don't think. So it's always been a fight. I took over about a decade later from Sue. I managed environmental water in the Macquarie, and then was involved in the 90s to about 2005 in the Gwydir. So I'm familiar with a lot of the issues up there. I'm familiar with the Gwydir waterhole. That graph that Deb showed is very important, because it shows that it shows the trend that we seem to be in one place, the trend that seems to be occurring across the basin, and certainly across New South Wales, where there's more and more pressure on rivers and wetlands. There's more and more pressure on delivering environmental water. And as an example, again, a bit further away, but in the Macquarie last year, a new interpretation of the New South Wales Water Management Act found that there was, well, in summary, that there were certain conditions needed about metering and measuring to deliver environmental water. And for a while there, last year, there was a whole pause on environmental watering across the state, because it was deemed to be, under the Water Management Act, deemed to be unlawful. Now, the idea that it can be against the law for rivers to have water in them is something that would have, well, it shocked me at the time. And it's still shocking. And then again this year, which seemed to be, I don't know the reason, we hear there was a complaint. There have been issues in the Gwydir for a long time, but we hear there was a complaint. And so the flows that were underway were ceased. And a striking element of that is that the water could be stopped, sort of unilaterally, but the department, had to get a license to go out and save the turtles. So you could take an action to kill them. Well, I'm not even sure how it was made or how the decision was made, but I certainly know the full bureaucratic process swung into action before Deb and her team could save them. So Kate mentioned, I'll just touch briefly on environmental watering. It's as though there's more and more pressure. The case against environmental watering seems to be getting stronger. I don't quite understand why, but it isn't. It's not an unplanned thing. As I said, the first environmental water release was made that I know of was made in 1980 in the Macquarie Marshes. It's been happening there for nearly 50 years. It's been happening in the Gwydir for 30 years. Things that were accepted or acknowledged or allowed practice suddenly are no longer we're no longer confident we can do them, and it augurs very poorly for the future of the whole process, environmental watering.
Thanks, Bill. And yes, I mean, it's very bizarre, has been very difficult to work out what the hell is going on, that suddenly environmental water and the release of environmental water, not suddenly, this has been kind of, I'm finding out more and more about it, in fact, that it's been kind of percolating in the background a bit over the last 12 months, a bit more, but how environmental water is being increasingly seen as a liability that Water New South Wales and the government are now afraid of in terms of being sued, as opposed to both an asset and something they are required to do under all of the laws in relation to water, Murray-Darling Basin Plan, Federal Water Act, New South Wales Water Management Act, let alone the obligations that they've got under international law in terms of all of the Ramsar listed wetlands that need water at particular times, like breeding for the birds and turtles. Now, I'm going to go straight back to you, Deb, because people really want to know about what's happening with the turtles. And one of the really terrible parts of all of this is that you say the water's got, yes, we've got the water back. It's got to be released from the dam that you showed, the Copeton Dam, and make its way all the way through, past the bloody constraints and all of that, and actually get to the wetlands. I'm, obviously super worried. We're all worried in terms of the survivability of any turtles that were in the wetlands without water still. And then there's the 40, of course, that have been still at being cared for by Taronga. So can you provide an update, please, as best as you're able?
Yes, so we're still waiting for the water to be released, as far as I know. We obviously didn't catch every single turtle in the wetland. Different species have different amounts of resilience, so we would expect that the eastern long-necked turtles will do the best because they can survive more rates of dehydration. The Murray River turtle is almost gone from that wetland, so they're the species that are most sensitive to drying out, and we only caught 3 adult individuals in that whole sampling session. So it may be that they don't survive this extended period of drying. But we did manage to put 3 of those into Taronga, and they are a generalist species, so hopefully they can build up their numbers as long as the wetland now stays wet for a solid period of time. The problem with turtles is they take a long time to grow and mature. They're very slow in their life history. The broad-shelled turtles as well. We got 36 of those at Taronga Zoo, so we're hoping that the water will be there by spring. Those turtles can go back and have a good season ahead of them.
The broad-shelled turtles that you took to Taronga, sorry, yes, a bunch of them were gravid or had eggs. So were they able to lay eggs safely and successfully, do you know yet, at Taronga?
Yes, I don't know exactly how many of them, but I know they were successfully inducing the eggs out of the turtles.
Wow.
So it's really good because all those little baby hatchlings will be able to go back.
Which is a very significant achievement, Debbie, for you and your team, like your small team of exhausted, 3, exhausted students caked in mud and just not stopping, honestly. You could, imagine seeing the release of all the little baby ones as well. That's some good in all of this craziness. So there's lots of questions. Now, in terms of environmental water and the way in which it's kind of managed. So, Bill, it's released from Copeton Dam and bought, the Commonwealth bought that water, right? That was then stopped. Is that correct? The most recent water that was due and didn't make it. It was a purchase of environmental water from the Commonwealth.
I think some of it is. There's a mix. Some of it is what they call an environmental contingency allowance. There's also water that the state owns, New South Wales owns, and which they purchased, and there's water that the Commonwealth purchased. So it's water purchased. The water that's held in Copeton is licensed water purchased for the environment.
And so and I just also note some of the discussion that's coming in, and all of this is so important, by the way, with Maria Cutmore, maybe relation to Polly, who we spoke about, potentially wasn't able to make it tonight, but maybe not. Sorry, Maria. But that the McIntyre has stopped flowing completely at Mungandai, first time anyone can remember. This is the issue, and I might actually get the slide there. I've got 2 slides to show, which I think are really quite full. And if you're there, Ben, to throw the first one up of the MDBA, maybe Ben is not there at the moment because I'll just wait for the screen share. Yes, thank you. Excellent. So this was in 2022. The MDBA put out a newsletter, very excited about the wetlands, thriving wetlands, bringing new life to the basin, talked about all the animals, the endangered, critically endangered birds that were using it. That is Gingham Waterhole. That is where, then January 2022, and that's where 4 years later, the next photo, that's what it is now. And 2022, January 2022, I mean, that was a drier period as well, but we have had so much water. There's so much water in the system, thanks, Ben, just that how on earth have we got to this position where it's been 3 and a bit years with Labor at the state level, and Labor's been in at the federal level for longer. Do we have a situation where a waterhole and a wetland can dry up that much? And you're telling me in the chat as well, telling everyone in the chat, that this is not isolated. Gwydir is not isolated. Gingham Waterhole is not isolated. Bill started talking about Walgett. I know we've got people on here. Vanessa, feel like you do a romper room thing sometimes on this in terms of seeing everybody. But you can see everybody tuning in and talking about how it's happening everywhere. Meanwhile, we know the storages are full, the floodplain harvesting rules have just been completely I want to say doctored, but rigged, basically, to give irrigators as much as they can, as much as they want almost. And I know Bill is on the Environmental Watering Action Group, so also advisory group, sorry, not action, it's not action, Bill, and has to be reasonably cautious in terms of making statements. I will jump in occasionally and give my opinion about what's actually happening. So I just want to cover the legal risks for a second. So the unfortunate problem is that while we had the win, and I tell you what, that bill would not have passed when it did to be able to send the water down the Gingham Waterhole, to send water to those turtles, if it wasn't for Debbie doing what she did, us capturing the footage, getting it back, and then thousands upon thousands of you hassling, phoning, emailing the media, emailing the MPs and the media coverage. It was very, very powerful, and thank you so much for everything you did. Without a doubt, that bill would not have passed at that time, because what has been sitting with the government, that they've told us that they've been wanting to address certain liability issues. So liability issues around environmental water travelling over private land. For goodness sake, it's environmental water on floodplains, it's going to travel over private land, but somehow there has been, the government has been pressured very heavily, and they brought legislative fixes, as they said, to the parliament, but then they sat on them. And I think they sat on them because of the pressure from the irrigators and others who didn't want them to introduce these bills or move the bills and pass them, right, which would allow environmental water to be released more easily and to be able to go over the various easements, private land. So we've had a bill that was introduced, it was something like October last year or earlier, and it was just sitting there. And this is what I think with this Water New South Wales one. They knew that all of this was happening. They knew it was happening well before any, bad PR images of turtles got to the media. So I just really want to stress that the government was sitting for many, 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 many months on the legislative change is needed to enable the release of environmental water. So make no mistake that raising our voices at the time really, really pressured them, which is a very good thing, of course. So, Bill, just in terms of other issues, so with it's not fixed though, is it? Like, we've passed the one bill which dealt with easements and this specific instance of Water New South Wales liability, which, again, the objects of the Water Act, all of that, supposed to put environmental water first. Like, how it's come to this, who knows? The government apparently had solid legal advice saying they're at risk. But there's still water that can't be released, isn't there? We're not faced. It's still an issue, is that right? Can you give a bit of a update of where it's at from what you know?
Well, the bill passed, and that was a good thing. I don't know if the water has been ordered, and if it has been ordered, I think it'll take. I think because of the very low rates that it will arrive, it could take months to arrive at the Gingham waterhole. There's a lot of water in Capeton Dam, a lot of environmental water, and one of the reasons is because it is so hard to release it. The constraints, but the limitations on delivering it are enormous up there. And just I'll go back to environmental watering. So these environmental water advisory groups exist across the state, in rivers across the state. I'm on the Macquarie. I'm not speaking on behalf of the group or the business of the group. I'm an outsider on the Gwydir, so I'm not speaking. I'm not on the Environmental Water Advisory Group. However, the way they operate is they have a long-term plan. It's based on. It goes right back to the cap when they said, "Look, too much water is being taken out. We have to stop extractions, and then we have to recover water." So there was new legislation about 25 years ago. There was the National Water Initiative. There was John Howard's speech at the Press Club in 2007, where he said that the Commonwealth was taking it over because the states had got us in this mess in the first place. And then the Water Act, the Commonwealth Water Act, the Basin Plan, and there's a structure of environmental watering. So the Basin Plan has an environmental watering plan chapter. It set up basin watering strategies, and each state then, certainly New South Wales, there's a long-term watering plan that mirrors the basin-wide strategy. So this is not just some whimsical notion that we're going to put a bit of water into wetland. Well, in the Gwydir there's been 30 years of planning and work. In the Macquarie is even longer. I know in the Murray it's been going for decades and decades, and there are really detailed plans with expert ecologists and managers who set them up, and there's tons of notice. There's years of notice about why, what for. The science is rigorous, and nobody would have been. And these environmental watering advisory groups, they have agency people, they have people like me, community people with expertise. They have representatives of all the agencies, fisheries. They have community people on the Gwydir. I believe there are farmers, there are dryland farmers, there are irrigators. There are a wide representation of the community. So it's no surprise, and there's a plan. There's an annual plan. So none of this was a surprise to anybody. And the Gingham Waterhole has been known for decades to be a really important refuge in that part of the system. So none of this was a surprise. So when it was suddenly turned off, when the water was just stopped, and when we were up there, Kate, we saw that the water got within about 100 metres of the waterhole. And it was turned off, and it got within 100 metres of the turtles.
It's
Um,
honestly, I feel like hearing all of that, and everyone is putting all of this in the chat as well. And there's a lot of people on here. I'm well aware of a lot of experience and knowledge working for many years, in the community or on the advisory committees, or being on a wonderful property that has wetlands for some of you. So well aware of this. And I just feel like there's got to be. I mean, if these farmers, a couple of farmers, one irrigated downstream, can threaten in terms of suing the government at this point, when you look at the state of the wetland, and when you people are making the point about it being Ramsar listed, Debbie showed a dead turtle. This is 2019. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more now, and you did find them as well. You said that, remember, the birds were circling as well when we were there. I think that requires suing the government, actually, in terms of standing up for the environment. But they have absolutely abrogated their responsibilities, and this is really, really big. I think it's a crime, like it's an actual crime, and I know some people are kind of talking about this. Something has to be done. And you know what we did with the turtles? It's like we were able to show the impact of these decisions. We were able to show, here's what happens when water doesn't reach an ecological asset, a critical water, critical asset, beautiful wetland. Reason it's Ramsar protected, reason why we have all of this, these plans in place. But here's what happens. And it's always been talking in some ways for a lot of people making decisions, people on the land know that they see it all the time. But I think that's what this has done. And there's more momentum now for protecting wetlands as a result of this. Debbie, I want to ask you about, because lots of people are putting in the chat, Jonathan, you've rightly said in the chat that important discussion tonight around turtles in the Gwydir system, but many smaller floodplain wetlands also support highly threatened waterbird species that can be easily overlooked despite being ecologically significant. How do we ensure these sites are properly recognised and taken seriously in future environmental watering and management decisions? And I wanted to throw to you, Debbie, in terms of, because there no doubt there's other wetlands that you go to, waterholes that you visit, that you also do work in. So what's your response to Jonathan there?
Yeah, Jonathan's absolutely right. And it was just pure chance that we happened to catch this when it was happening in a way that was able to be responded to. It wasn't the only waterhole. There were others. There are others. And because this was a statewide problem with the legislation, that bill being passed was really, really important. And I think Jonathan's picking up on an issue that this next iteration of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan really needs to try and correct for these things happening without us knowing, without us having to monitor constantly, and for people to really appreciate that the environmental water is for everybody. It's for the entire community. It's for irrigators as well as for the environment and for people. And without it, someone might profit in the short term, but nothing's going to work in the long term.
Thank you. And just in terms of, because you were talking about who benefits, environmental flows, environmental water benefits everybody. I've met, and every time I say this in the parliament, I always get the National Party members scoffing. But I have just met so many landholders who just love the water and recognise just how beneficial it is, not just for them in terms of productivity, but just love the wildlife and the beauty, and they understand how important it is, and love these areas on their land that are dedicated to wildlife and waterholes and wetlands. Bill, you would have come across a lot.
a lot of well, I have one of the well, what will I say? Deb being out there by chance, the Walgett River Rangers being out on the river on the weekend, the landholders in wetlands, and there are a lot of landholders in wetlands, and because these places are remote, it is it is landholders like Peter Guy, Jonathan Guy, Pat Johnston up in the Gwydir, the Halls, the McClellans in the Macquarie Marshes, and you've met those people, and they're all over the basin. There are people all over the basin who are fighting hard for the rivers. It's extraordinary that this has become a debate that the environment the debate seems to have been manipulated so that looking after the environment comes at a cost to people. This idea that that only development looks after communities. Where you look at Walgett and the problems Walgett's got with its water quality, the water in the river. It's full of contaminants. It's got pesticides in it, and so it seems to me that a lot of the voices that are speaking for the rivers, there are lots of them, but they're not very, but they don't seem to be very powerful at the moment.
Yes, and that's because it's important to acknowledge that there are landholders, they're good landholders, many of them, but there's no doubt that they are just so overpowered in terms of influence, of course, and the sheer number and scale of the big corporate irrigators. I always assume when I do these webinars that there's always one or two people from, from the other side, looking at what we're doing. So, but I will say this focus on wetlands has made us kind of look into these documents that we got recently back from. I can get all these documents through the Parliament if the upper house supports my motion. I did this last year and got heaps of documents back. Some of which were to do with the effort by the kind of science department of the Department of Environment, Energy and Water, Climate Change, Energy and Water. We're looking at, and I know some of you would have been involved and know about this, but we're looking at increasing the extent of wetlands that we're kind of needing to be protected and put in water sharing plans. So prescribed wetlands, if you like. And this is a process over a couple of years. The emails and the documents that I got back showed a very, very interesting situation indeed, that there was so much work done by the science people, the ecologists, and basically, ultimately, it was all knocked on the head in terms of additional wetlands on private property, more wetlands on private property. The communication that I saw from lots of the irrigators, different landholders, basically saying there is no way, that's not a wetland, that's a depression on my property. There's no way that there's just the pushback was extreme. And essentially, it was all knocked on the head and put off for another 5 to 6 years. So we are, that's going to be getting out there much more over the next month or two, just to kind of kick things along. But what was very clear from that process, and we're still going through the documents, is the influence behind the scenes, the bullying that, and I will say it is, and the influence of the powerful corporate irrigators is well and truly alive and kicking in this Labor government. It hasn't gone anywhere. And I think what we saw in terms of the Gingham waterhole was a culmination of all of that. And you know what? They were hoping that they got away with it. They were hoping that it would have just, that all of those turtles would have just been there and no one would have known. And on that note, I do want to encourage all of you, and I'm sure you've all got my email, but we'll pop it into the chat anyway. One of the best things that all of you could do if you do live regionally, if you live near waterways or are part of any communities that are working on, water quality issues, please feel free to share information with with me and my team, because I can, question the minister in budget estimates, give it to media. We've got journalists who are more interested in water issues now as a result of what's happened with the turtles and so I think we're at while it's not good news in terms of what's happening right now, I feel like we have built a bit of momentum. So any kind of stories, information, most of the work I do is based on information that people give me, and I'm just can just pop it over the line sometimes at a good moment. So please remember that as well. The Murray-Darling Basin Review, the submissions have closed recently, and there's going to be a review of the Water Act, Commonwealth Water Act, as well as part of it. Now, I'm hearing people aren't too impressed with the discussion paper that was put out in relation to the review. There seems to also be a move on potentially to reduce or weaken the power of the Commonwealth when it comes to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. Can you imagine? We've just had this in New South Wales, giving New South Wales more power over water. That just cannot happen with the influence of the irrigation industry here. Bill, what's your kind of thoughts around what you've kind of been involved with so far with this review? And we will have something at the end around what people can do and stuff. So hang tight, everyone.
So the Basin Plan Review, it was, and I've even though the submissions haven't been made public, there's been lots of sharing of people's submissions, and so I've read quite a few, including the Commissioner, the South Australian Commissioner of the River Murray, the Inspector General, and there's for start the discussion paper. My personal view is one of the worst documents of its type I've ever read. It contradicted itself. Because there's a big priming in it. Get ready, you're going to lose wetlands, you're going to lose environmental assets because of climate change. And then within a couple of pages, a decision that not to make any adjustments to irrigation extractions until 2035, 2050, because the climate change evidence is not clear. So that was two different applications of the same information, anti-environment, pro-irrigation of that document. There was another very poor example of it with just an assertion that the Macquarie Marshes is improving in condition. And only in January, the same department, the department of which MWA is a part, put out a very thorough scientific assessment of the Macquarie Marshes and deemed it to be an endangered ecological community. Its functions are collapsing. The connection between functions is breaking down. And back to the Gwydir wetlands, once you see refuges, you see turtles die, you see disconnected systems, you see flooding. And one of the things about truncated flooding is that when you water a system, when a system gets water on it, then plants germinate, insects hatch, things will start breeding, and they need at the minimum 3 months, 4 months to continue their life cycle. So anything that hatched or germinated or decided to breed in response to, well, the turtles are an example, this flooding, would have had it cut off and died. So that's what I mean by the loss of function, the disconnection of function. So the Macquarie Marshes was declared an endangered ecological community at risk of extinction by the Commonwealth Government in January, and the Lower Murray at the same time was a critically endangered ecological community. Now, people say rivers die from the mouth up, and you see the Coorong and the Lower Murray, they're in lots of trouble, and then you see fish kills at Menindee, and then in the 2019 drought there were enormous Murray cod being rescued from waterholes, but one fish at a time. Um, and and so we're seeing these catastrophes happen further up the system, and in fact, they're now happening. They're not happening on the margins of the system. They're happening at the heart of the system. So we're seeing environmental loss, environmental catastrophes happening at the heart of the system.
Yeah.
So I was the Basin Plan discussion paper was not a good document, and it got the treatment it deserved, as far as I can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think yes, it's kind of the fact that everything's gotten so much worse, and this kind of discussion paper came out that just seemed to almost gloss over everything and not want to almost throwing their hands, throwing their hands up and saying it's all too hard or something. I'm conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left because I do like to keep these very much on the hour. And I wanted to say, firstly, there's a lot of different questions, and I will. Jonathan Geyer again in terms of the Mallowar system, the Mallowar wetlands on Jonathan's property, just absolutely incredibly special, and they provide habitat to so many threatened bird species. And he's asked, why do we think the threatened species relying on the Mallowar system and have received so little direct attention within the Environmental Watering Advisory Group process, despite the ecological importance of these smaller floodplain wetlands? I don't know whether he's throwing you into it, Bill. It's a different EWAG to what you're on, but it's interesting. Like what's going on there? Politics?
Look, I don't know,
Irritated
Kate.
influence?
Look, well, I do know, and I'm not speaking on behalf of or as part of the EWAG, but I do know that there's a lot on EWAGs. There tend to be sometimes interests that argue against environmental watering, and I know that occurs on more than one. Um, that's what you get when you get a broad range of community views. Look, I don't know. One of the things in my experience is that. Um, and this is not the case in the Gwydir because I know there's a lot of water in Copeton that is hard to use. Um, I don't think I can really comment on the Gwydir EWAG with
All
any
right. I'm
authority.
going to interrupt. Good, done. If you can't, sorry.
All right.
Because,
Yeah.
because we've got 1 minute left. And if you can't, no, I thought I probably shouldn't have thrown it at you actually, because there's potentially conflict, and people need to be reasonably careful. So what do you, Deb, feel that there's like more kind of focus on water issues? Like, how are you feeling about a kind of whether people are starting to want to, get active and take action? How have you felt in terms of the response to all of this?
I was really relieved, and I couldn't believe how much support we got when people saw what was happening at the Gwydir. And that really reinvigorated my belief that the vast majority of people do want clean water and rivers to run. It's this issue of a certain group of people who don't want it, who seem to have a lot of money and a very loud voice. And so the challenge will be for the rest of us in the majority to get heard and make action happen.
Exactly, and that is absolutely perfect to finish on. I want to just let you all know that we will be emailing all of you and starting like a campaign for people to be able to register their commitment and support to speak out for wetlands in the future. So in terms of environmental water. So we will email all of you with this. We're just kicking it off the ground now. There are so many, like communities everywhere care about this, and I think the government has just been kind of thinking that no, it's all cost of living and all this and that, and economic, we've got to get the industries all productive and mining and blah. Sure, but there's still so many people who are just so passionate. And then there are so many people in the community who care if we can speak to them the right way. So wetlands warriors, we are going to kick this off in a few days. You don't have to do anything at the time in terms of emailing people, blah, but signing up, because I was so inspired by how many people took action and at that time. And I reckon that is just the kind of tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of all of the different local issues, all of the different, Walgett, for example, there are just so many, and I know we will be able to start telling those stories, and images are just incredibly powerful. Your stories are incredibly powerful. So all of that, don't feel like you're out there alone experiencing, looking at degraded landscapes and looking at terrible rivers. Make sure you share that information with us. So we'll let you know more about that in a couple of days. And I'm sorry to pull the plug. That's what we have to do with these things. But I wanted to thank you. It's like 120 people joined us tonight, which I think is a pretty good turnout on this. And I am feeling very encouraged, but what I think is a movement of people starting to build around water issues, and it couldn't happen at a better time. Debbie, you're an absolute champion. Thank you so much for your work, and I just love scientists so much. Bill, thank you so much for all of your incredible work and advocacy, and both of you being wetlands and wildlife warriors. And we'll do plenty more visits. And one last thing, Debbie, the turtles. What do you reckon? A month? We can go out there and see if there's any turtles in the mud when the water reaches the wetlands.
Yeah.
Literally.
About a month. When the
Yeah,
water reaches it, it'll soften up. The ones, if any are left, they'll be there.
Yeah. I'm not joking. I'm going to put it in my diary. We're going to go out there and see what's happened. Thank you all. Thank you all for caring. Thanks all for tuning in. And that's a wrap. Thank you.